Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more Vati. It has been a hot minute. Um, but you know, thought we'd take a little break, but now we're back. And actually, one of the people that helped work on the Lord of Frenzied Flame story video actually commented on that video. So that's very validating every time that happens when either the creator themselves or someone that was a part of the process comments on the reaction videos. That makes me feel better about what I'm doing here. It makes me feel like I am actually providing something meaningful as a reactor. So that's always, validating to my existence on YouTube here. Because sometimes, I have my doubts, and sometimes I do have weak videos that I'm not too proud of. But you can't be too picky. You gotta upload. I've established that I upload every day, because that if I were to stop, YouTube would kill me. Um, but anyways, this time we're gonna dive into Dark Souls 3 lore of the main bosses because, well, I wanted to venture out outside of Elden Ring, and we watched the Bloodborne one. That one went well. And so now I'm gonna hear about Dark Souls 3. Again, literally the only From Software games that I have played are Elden Ring and Sekiro. Elden Ring is the only one that I have beaten. Sekiro, I put 2 hours in, could not get into it. And it might partially be because I was playing it on PS4 Pro, which I think was capped at 30 frames. Maybe that has something to do with maybe if I were to play it on PC at 60 frames, I'd be better. I don't know. Um, for that, I would need to be paid to play another From Software game, especially Sekiro. Although I think I would like the parry mechanics. But anyways, blah blah blah. Let's go ahead and just dive right in here to the lore of the main bosses.
The stories of Souls games have always revolved around bosses, but that statement has never been more true than for Dark Souls 3. If you understand who you're killing in this game, then you will understand the story. The first one in your way is Iudex Gundyr, the Ashen Judge and scabbard to the coiled sword of the shrine.
That's a dope name.
This sword is bequeathed only to chosen Ash, who can best him in battle. But before he was the Ashen Judge, Gundyr walked through this place much like we did, on his way to meet his Firekeeper and link the fire. Charged with a duty and granted a cast iron halberd that would never crumble, Gundyr arrived, late, greeted by a shrine without fire and a bell that would not toll. The flame had already faded, and his Firekeeper had been thrown into the depths of the bell tower, grave of Firekeepers past. She never met her champion, and the ensuing tragic farce became a favorite tale of the masses. And after he was bested by an unknown warrior, which is probably us, Gundyr the champion became sheathed to a coiled sword in the hopes that someday the first flame would be linked once more. Perhaps Gundyr, with his unbreakable halberd, was fated to eternal service from the beginning. Since it's implied that Gundyr expected to meet a Firekeeper, he was likely meant as a candidate for linking the fire. Those capable of linking the fire are named Lords of Cinder, beings capable of bringing back the world from the brink of darkness by linking the first flame. Indeed, the game speaks of 3 Lords of Cinder who have already linked the fire, and their
Maybe I should have watched a Dark Souls 3 story explained first for diving into the lore of the main bosses.
being resurrected as a last resort to link it once again. In the opening cutscene, you saw them: Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, Yhorm the Giant, and Farron's Abyss Watchers. Each of these lords once had an age of their own, and the remnants of their age lives on in Dark Souls 3 and in their resurrection. For example, Aldrich is linked to these bosses and their stories, the Abyss Watchers are linked here, and those in Lothric are conjoined here. For simplicity's sake, we're going to discuss these stories in 3 chunks, starting with Aldrich, Pontiff Sulyvahn, Vort, and the Dancer, who all reside in the Boreal Valley. The Boreal Valley is currently ruled over by Pontiff Sulyvahn, a tyrant who sends his Outrider Knights to serve as his watchful eyes and his guards. and the first knight of Pontiff Sullivan we meet is Vort, an Outrider Knight who ambushes us as we attempt to leave Lothric. So the Outrider Knight's job is to keep an eye on things. Sullivan's knights are also described as his watchful eyes and his punitive blades. Each Outrider Knight is provided with a ring by the Pontiff, which transforms them into
A ring? 9 rings for men, 3 for elves, 7 for the dwarves, and 1 to rule them all. Huh?
frenzied beasts and lures them into battles of death. Specifically, the 2 main Outrider Knights.
Ooh, that's a beautiful shot. Honestly, I like this more than like this aesthetic here, like this view. I like this more than any of the most beautiful spots in Elden Ring. I like cities and then like mountains behind them. Like I love this aesthetic. I love this shit. Now, granted, there were very beautiful shots with like the stars and the moon and stuff. I don't know. There's just something about this that I find just more beautiful.
We see upon the high wall of Lothric appear at both points of progression in the area, so perhaps they serve as strategically placed guards in order to hinder our progression, and for Sullivan to keep an eye on the world. When you went through Irithyll, I'm sure you noticed those ghosts that seem to be walking the streets. Well, they likely represent the Outrider Knights before their departure and descent into madness, because 2 in particular are very interesting. They walk together, 1 man, 1 female, and the woman wears the mask of the dancer. Vort was never far from the fleeting dancer, who watches over Emma in Lothric's Grand Cathedral. The dancer is far more intriguing than Vort is. The Pontiff ordered her to serve as a dancer, and then he ordered her to serve as his Outrider Knight. He bestowed enchanted swords upon her, 1 dark and 1 light, mirroring his own. Eventually, the black eyes of the Pontiff transformed her into a beastly creature, her gauntlets fusing with her own hide. The fascinating thing about the dancer, though, is who she was before she became Sullivan's pet. It's a very popular theory that she is one of the 3 daughters of Guinevere who appear in-game. Here's the evidence. Her Aurora Veil is said to be an article of the Old Gods, which is permitted only for direct descendants of the old royal family. The dancer's soul can also be transposed to give you the spell Soothing Sunlight, miracle of Guinevere of the old royalty. Guinevere used to reside in Anor Londo, home of the gods, and her line continues in Lothric. So Guinevere was also revered as a goddess of fertility and bounty. She raised many heavenly children, and the dancer, having one of the 3 sunlight spells, is clearly one of them. And of course, as you know, Pontiff Sullivan, the Tyrant, now rules over Irithyll and Anor Londo, so it's my belief that Sullivan gained power within Anor Londo, then proclaimed himself Pontiff, and ordered Guinevere's daughter to serve as his dancer and then Outrider Knight. The royal family was usurped and devoured and torn apart by Sullivan, who Yorshka says wrongfully
All the homies hate Sullivan? Sounds like a dick.
proclaimed himself Pontiff. Even after the family's passing, the Silver Knights looked over their manor and the ruined cathedral. The story behind Pontiff Sullivan's rise to power is told lightly, with only clues peeking above the surface, but in a nutshell, I believe Pontiff Sullivan took over Anor Londo from within, probably with the help of the Deacons of the Deep. The only ones in his way
What the fuck? Ew, their faces are gross.
were the Dark Moon Knights.
The Dark Moon
Smash. I mean,
Knights were once led by my elder brother, the Dark Sun Gwendolyn, but he was stricken by illness.
is that the same voice actress for Ranni?
My elder brother, the Dark Sun Gwendolyn.
That voice actress is for sure in Elden Ring.
But he was stricken by illness, and leadership of the Knights
Is it Ranni?
fell to me. Then Sullivan wrongfully proclaimed himself Pontiff.
That's gotta be Ranni. There's gotta be.
and took me prisoner. Or where could my dear brother be?
So when I say that Pontiff Sullivan took over Anor Londo from within, it is speculation on my part, but my reasoning is that he knew of Gwyndolin, and he knew of Yorshka, and he wrongfully proclaimed himself Pontiff, which all imply that he was a part of the system already. A Pontiff is essentially a high priest, and the miracles, the weaponry, and the rings of the Dark Moon all rely on faith. Additionally, there's a bit more evidence that the Pontiff was a part of the Dark Moon system already. The sword in his left hand is a ceremonial sword representing the judgment of the moon. However, its magic is far closer to sorcery than any existing lunar power. Its dark blue hues, deeper than the darkest moon, reflect Sorcerer Sullivan's true nature. Yorshka calls Sullivan a tyrant, which can mean someone who elects themselves ruler without legal right. This, along with his greatsword of judgment that references the moon, furthers that idea that he took over from within, the figurehead of a movement that was abandoning their faith in favor of Sullivan's true calling, dark sorceries. And the same sort of shift was happening amongst the Deacons of the Deep, who we find all throughout Anor Londo. Originally, though, they were a group of clergymen dedicated to sealing away the potential horrors of the deep. Deep Protection tells us that the deep was originally a peaceful and sacred place, its deacons wearing dark red robes denoting their
They're
blessing
hideous.
of fire. Over time, however, the deep
Ew.
became the final rest for many abhorrent things, and indeed, human dregs were likely some of those things, as the dregs of humanity are said to sink to the lowest depths imaginable, forming the bedrock of the world. Those who linger too long on the brink of the deep will often slip, and lurking within the deep are insects which tear open the skin and burrow into flesh. Eventually, those dedicated to sealing away the horrors of the deep succumb to its very power. An example of this is their Tome of Knowledge, which was originally intended to teach divine protection, but it had dark tales added to its pages, making it a thing most profane. And along with this descent, presumably, was Aldrich, Saint of the Deep.
A right and proper cleric, only he developed a habit of devouring men. He ate so many that he bloated like a drowned pig, then softened into sludge. So they stuck him in the Cathedral of the Deep, and they made him a Lord of Cinder, not for virtue, but for might.
Aldrich was this simple saint who became a hugely powerful being, eventually chosen, maybe willingly and maybe not, to become a Lord of Cinder and link the fire. The Deacon's skirt tells us that the Deacons tended to the
Yo, I've seen this fight so many times, like on clips, and stuff like that. I've like, you know, on TikTok or just shorts, and stuff like that. I've seen this fight so many times, and still I don't understand what you do here.
flame, and I'm perhaps inclined to believe that this meant that maybe they were tending to the flame of Aldrich when he was a Lord of Cinder. And whether this is true or not, we do know that
That's
the
a
Deacons
big
eventually
coffin.
succumbed to the horrors of the deep, and neither tending to the flame nor the faith could save them. You would have noticed that many deacons cast Dark Soul sorceries, which were imparted to them by Archdeacon.
Oh, I guess it sort of does it work similarly to the fight with Ronalna, where you gotta clear out these guys so that you can then whack that guy.
MacDonald, an adherent of Aldrich who was largely responsible for the corruption of the deacons. Archdeacon MacDonald delighted in the
Or do you just kill them all?
cathedral's stagnating souls. For him, they represented the glorious bedrock of this world. Under the guidance of Archdeacon MacDonald, these deacons became both clergymen and sorcerers. The Archdeacon's sin, as it's called, was to channel faith for sorcery, which transformed his staff from a symbol of religious authority into a catalyst of dark sorceries. The deacons, they still had faith, but it was not in fire any longer. It was in Aldrich, Saint of the Deep, their master. Upon his resurrection, Aldrich, like many Lords of Cinder, ruminated on the fading of the fire. For him, it inspired visions. He saw beyond the age of fire to the age of deep waters and the coming age of the deep sea. Filled with new purpose, he knew what he had to do. He would devour the gods himself. When we get to the Deacons of the Deep, we expect to find Aldrich in his coffin, but he's already left for his home in the Boreal Valley. The deacons here are led by Archdeacon Royce, who is one of the 3 archdeacons who remained behind to keep eternal watch over his master's coffin, hoping that one day he would return. Aldrich left behind a small doll in his coffin that Pontiff Sullivan gave to his most valued subjects. Wherever you go, the moon sets in Irithyll. Wherever you may be, Irithyll is your home. When Aldrich left, Archdeacon MacDonald went with him. We come across MacDonald in the depths of Anor Londo, and MacDonald, like many other deacons, is obese. He's huge, and I see that as a legacy of Aldrich, who derived power from gluttony. They're clearly mimicking him. In Anor Londo, Archdeacon MacDonald came to lead the Aldrich faithful, who are defenders, who exist to ensure that Aldrich, devourer of gods, remains undisturbed. And when we come across Aldrich, we realize why he wants to be undisturbed. Because Pontiff Sullivan, with a devourer of gods by his side, has imprisoned a god of the old royalty in the abandoned cathedral to be fed to the devourer. Gwyndolin, son of Gwyn and prior leader of the Darkmoon Knights, was gradually devoured by Aldrich. As Aldrich slowly devoured the god of the Dark Moon, he dreamt. In this dream, he saw the form of a young, pale girl in hiding, and we know this is Yorshka, who was sister to Gwyndolin, and a half-breed who is parallel to Priscilla from Dark Souls 1. But the interesting thing about this is the dream that Aldrich had, because apparently Aldrich only needs to dream about someone to learn their skills, for he uses Priscilla's Life Hunt Scythe in battle. And this fact that he can learn things through his visions has some interesting implications, because Aldrich is clearly wielding a Gravelord Greatsword upon the end of his spear, which lends credit towards this theory that Aldrich has devoured Nito in some capacity, and he is called the Devourer of Gods, plural, after all. So another question becomes, did Aldrich also devour Nito? Well, he has the wispy Nito-like cloak with skulls within it, but I think it's more likely that these skulls are just remnants of other humans that he's devoured. You have to remember there is no concrete evidence that he has devoured Nito, and I personally think it's more likely that he simply dreamt up the Gravelord spell in a similar manner to which he dreamt up the Life Hunt Scythe from Yorshka. But what you think shapes the story here, so let me know. So that's all of the Pontiff's lackeys explained for the most part, and the biggest unanswered questions here to go into in other videos is what exactly the relationship between Salavan and the deacons is, and in what order this story of corruption and treachery played out, because timeline is always...
Definitely feel like I'm missing out on some things because I don't know, like, the surrounding, overarching kind of story that's supposed to be going on here, so I'm kind of going in trying to piece things together, and I'm not going to be able to, you know?
Is one of the hardest things to get right in the Soul series, but the biggest curiosity, in my opinion, and the one that really interests me, are Aldrich's visions of the Age of the Deep Sea, from a being, remember, that has visions so accurate he can learn spells from those visions. So, in a franchise that's entirely self-contained within this Age of Fire and its cycles, this vision of the Deep Sea, it's pretty much the only mention of a different future, and its appearance in these descriptions feels so out of place that I almost expect it to be referenced in the future in some capacity. Assuming it's not just a reference to Bloodborne, maybe this indicates what Miyazaki is doing next on one of his projects, or maybe we'll see something related to this in the DLC. Moving on. Something set Sullivan down this path. When Sullivan was a young sorcerer, he discovered the profaned capital, and down there he discovered an unfading flame below a distant tundra of Irithyll, and when he found this, a burning ambition took root within him. the Profaned Flame. The origins of it aren't known, but we do know a few things. We know it's an unfading flame, we know that it can be manipulated, and we know that it swallows the hearts of those who wield it. The pontiff himself imbued his greatsword with this fire, and he also gave it to his holy knights. Shortly after he did this, the fire witches had their hearts swallowed by the flame. And as one last example of its corrupting influence, the handmaidens who wield it down in the profaned capital, their dagger says that they take pleasure in wounding others, and
Thank you. Tell them to hit me up.
of course, the pontiff himself doesn't exactly have a very good moral compass. But apart from that, we know precious little about the Profaned Flame, and this has been the hardest part of the script to write for me, because the Profaned Flame defies all categorization as flames that have existed previously in the series, so I'm going to work on my theories on it, and while I'm doing...
Oh god, fucking Miyazaki and his gargoyles, it's just like him and his fucking swamps. Fuck gargoyles, man.
that I'll list those theories in the description, because I could talk about this thing for a very long time without actually getting anywhere. But the final thing, and maybe the most important thing we know about the Profaned Flame, is that Yhorm the Giant became a Lord of Cinder to put it to rest. Now, clearly, Yhorm was not successful, because the Profaned Flame has infiltrated almost all of Irithyll and set a lot of events in motion. This just adds even more tragedy to Yhorm's tale. Yhorm is the descendant of an ancient conqueror, and was asked by the very people once subjugated to lead them, serving as both a weighty blade and a stone-hard shield. Yhorm fought unflinchingly as a one-man vanguard, but one day he lost the one he wished to protect. In response, he threw down his great shield and added a left-handed notch to his machete instead, so he could two-hand it, for he no longer had anything left to protect. All the while, his human subjects appeared quite disrespectful of him. They were insincere when they called him a lord, and they doubted him. He is called Lonely Yhorm in his cinders, and perhaps that's because he lost the one he wished to protect, or perhaps because he didn't have the love of his people. At some point, the Profaned Flame became a real problem in the capital, for according to his cinders, Yhorm decided to sacrifice himself and become a Lord of Cinder to put the Profaned Flame to rest. I don't know why Yhorm decided that, hey, I'm gonna put out fire with fire, because when he did this, fire rained down from the sky and incinerated naught but human flesh. This is an interesting insight into who the linking of the fire consumes. It consumed humans, and humans alone, and you see their disfigured, smelted corpses all around Yhorm's chamber. Before he linked the fire, however, Yhorm left behind two Storm Rulers, which was a legendary greatsword, also known as the Giant Slayer, for the residual strength of storm that brings giants to their knees. So this thing could kill giants, and one he gave to the humans who doubted him. He called them out on their cowardly words and gave them a weapon capable of killing him. And the other Storm Ruler he gave to a dear friend in return for a promise. This dear friend was Sigurd, who journeys to the profaned capital in order to uphold his promise and slay his old friend. Presumably, Yhorm asked Sigurd to kill him if he ever betrayed his duty, and Sigurd does so, seeing that Yhorm has not returned to link the fire once again. The profaned capital also had its sorcerers, who claimed heirship to the legacy of the renowned scholar Big Hat Logan, even going so far as to emulate the type of staff he used. But halfway across the world, I know of two crystal sages who emulated him even more closely. These crystal sages served as spiritual guides to the scholars of Lothric's Grand Archives, and one of them went on to ally with the Undead Legion. The Undead Legion of Farron was a caravan of undead, dedicated to the eradication of the Abyss wherever it was found. The Abyss Watchers, as they were called, follow the duty and the form of the Wolf Knight of Dark Souls 1, known as Artorias the Abyss Walker. They are essentially his legacy. They made their home in Farron Keep, and high above Farron Keep lies an emaciated old wolf. The Abyss Watchers, for
Puppy.
their hunting of the Abyss, they required some art that went beyond any existing art. Wolf's Blood, the legacy of Artorias, provided just that. Their pointed steel helm became shirked as this sinister omen by the masses, because, think about it, if you saw that pointed steel helmet coming towards your kingdom, you knew you were in trouble, because these guys are dedicated to taking out the Abyss. And indeed, their home in Farron might just be set above such a kingdom, for below are the catacombs of Karthus, and sealed within a goblet, deep below in the catacombs, is the encounter with High Lord Wolnir, a ruler who succumbed to the Abyss. Before succumbing to the Abyss, Wolnir was a conqueror. He ruled over the people of Karthus of the Sands, formidable warriors who were masters of the
Damn. That goes deep.
curved sword, and also of pyromancies that enhanced the effectiveness of their curved swords. The swordsmen attached great value to victory at all costs, for where was the honor in death? They lived for their High Lord Wolnir, who was conqueror of most lands known to their people, and yeah, you can see why they loved him. In Wolnir's time, there were other lords who had their crowns rightfully bequeathed upon them, but Wolnir brought them to their knees and ground their crowns to dust, forming his own crown from theirs, for he was the one High Lord, keen to outlive all others. Reminds me a lot of what we did in Dark Souls 2. Anyway, somehow Wolnir himself fell to the Abyss, and he was gripped by this fear of true darkness, and he pleaded to the gods for the first time. In our boss fight with him, there is a darkness below Wolnir, and it's struggling to consume him, but Wolnir had his holy sword, and he had 3 armlets which he had stripped from the corpses of clerics,
Pretty cool.
and
That
these
sword
things
summon
gave
there,
him some
sick.
semblance of comfort. Of course, we destroy the bracelets, and the Abyss finally consumes him. While he was in the Abyss, however, Wolnir was not inactive. Black Serpent is this pyromancy that was discovered from the Abyss by Wolnir, which went on to inspire the black arts of his Grave Wardens. The Grave Warden Pyromancy Tome was developed by his Grave Wardens who discovered his pyromancies. And going back up for a second, Wolnir and the Abyss, their proximity to the Abyss Watchers probably isn't coincidence. In fact, it makes quite a lot of sense for Karthus to be one of the kingdoms that the Abyss Watchers toppled. So let's go back up to the Abyss Watchers for a second and see if this theory holds any weight. Eventually, the Abyss Watchers became Lords of Cinder. Their shared wolf's blood served their mandate as lords. Essentially, it met the requirements. To gain access to the Abyss Watchers, you have to extinguish 3 flames, and I always wondered why this ritual existed. It felt very video gamey and out of place, but I went through once more recently, and I looked really closely at the engravings behind each flame. One looks like the 4 kings, one looks like Nito, and one looks like the Bed of Chaos, 3 of the main lords in Dark Souls 1, and these were the souls you had to collect to gain access to Gwyn and open a giant stone door. So these are likely here to symbolize that, right? We're extinguishing 3 flames and we're opening the door that explains the ritual. Anyway, that's more a piece of trivia than anything. After the Legion's Watchers became Lords of Cinder, the wolf blood dried up and Farron was consumed by a
Oh,
festering
here's the fucking swamp. Miyazaki.
wood. Dark wraiths began to roam, the keep fell to ruins, and as suggested by many of you in my lore through,
Y'all think Miyazaki knows how to not make a swamp? How long until he makes an entire game that is just swamp? Like, remember, he said, like, when Elden Ring came out, or whatever, he said it was the closest to his idea of what a perfect game would be. Elden Ring is the closest that he says he has gotten to making what he believes to be the perfect game, right? I wonder if his perfect game is an open world swamp where no one has shoes. The dogs are loose.
the Abyss Watchers, upon being resurrected to link the fire once more, may have been affected by the Abyss as well. So here's the theory. The Abyss Watchers were driven to seek out the Abyss, right? Well, what if, upon their resurrection, the
smacking.
Abyss far below in
Oh.
the catacombs of Karthus crept into the Abyss Watchers themselves? This would explain why the Abyss Watchers are locked into endless combat with themselves, because they're driven to seek out the Abyss, but they also can't die, so they're locked into endless combat. When I read this theory in the comments, something else clicked as well. The Wolf Knight armor, which belonged to Artorias, who fell to the Abyss, says that the armor of the Abyss Watchers suggests their own eventual end. So the game is drawing a parallel here between Artorias and the Abyss Watchers. It's saying that the armor of the Abyss Watchers shows that they're falling to the Abyss as well. And here's the really interesting thing. When you look closely at their armor, you realize it has black tendrils of the Abyss rising up. So the armor is showing us that they fell to the Abyss. Probably. This theory isn't concrete, and no one should take it as such, but I think it's the best explanation for their infighting. It's my favorite explanation, anyway. And, mostly, this one was all you guys, so thank you. Onwards to Lothric. The Knights of Lothric
Dragon.
were hunters of dragons, explaining their affinity with lightning and why they worshipped the sun. They have since tamed dragons, and with their drakes, they once crushed anything that threatened their shores. The knight has served as one of the 3 pillars of Lothric since ancient times, and it shares place alongside the wyverns as a symbol of Lothric. However, tales of dragon slayers are now a rare thing, and they're told only in fragments and whispers in remote regions. The Dragonslayer armor lost its master long ago, but it still remembers the sporting hunts they shared together. When we fight against it, the armor retains its master's fighting style, but now it has a new master, the Pilgrim Butterfly. Now, the
Fuck
soul
is
of the
that thing?
Dragonslayer armor is the only mention of these butterfly creatures, so speculation abounds whenever you talk about them. When you look up at them closely, though, closer than the game intends you to ever get, you'll see that they're flesh and bone, and they're almost bent backwards with a ribcage jutting outwards. Now, their name is one of the biggest clues that we have, and the word pilgrim makes me think of the pilgrims of Londor, who all died on their way to the peak of Lothric. And just like these pilgrim butterflies fly upwards to the peak of Lothric as well. And in both these cases, with the pilgrims and the pilgrim butterflies, we have no real idea why either of them are going up. So perhaps we'll learn more if we ever get Londor-themed DLC, and I think that's pretty likely. I'm going to list 2 other theories in the description about the butterflies, because the bottom line is we don't know what they are. Next is the Archives, and beyond the Archives is Prince Lothric and his brother, Lorien. Curiously, these are the only Lords of Cinder who were not featured in the opening cutscene of Lords being resurrected, and I believe that's because they never linked the fire. And I think their rejection of linking the fire might have been what set all of the desperate resurrections into motion. This is just a theory, but I think it's backed up by most of these descriptions and this dialogue.
Prince Lothric is in your hands. Please save his soul. Tell him what he must be, a lord.
So, there's Prince Lothric and Lorien, his brother. Lorien is the eldest, and before he was crippled, he was a knight who single-handedly slayed a demon prince, the victory eternally scorching his sword with flame. The Cinders of a Lord state that the Lothric bloodline was obsessed with creating a worthy heir. They needed someone to link the flame, and for some reason Prince Lorien did not suffice. So they put their faith in their next-born, Prince Lothric, as his throne states, last hope of his line. Prince Lothric, destined to be a Lord of Cinder, was born into swaddling clothes used in ancient prayer, and they are all that he has ever worn. He was cherished by the royal family, despite being born into illness, a frail and shriveled child. He was their last hope, and meant to be a champion, but some things will remain distant dreams forever. Linking the fire proved impossible, so the family resorted to unspeakable means. Descriptions don't say or imply what these unspeakable means are, so that's up to us to guess at. But after mentioning these unspeakable means, the Cinder description goes on to say that the path to linking the fire is a cursed one indeed. So Prince Lothric was cursed. With what, we don't know, but Lorien embraced his brother's curse, leaving him mute and crippled. It is said that Lorien, the one who embraced the curse, did so willingly and embraced his fate. When we kill Lorien in the boss fight, Lothric resurrects him, saying, "For that is our curse." So maybe being unable to die itself is the fire-linking curse, and why he says,
You remain among the accursed.
after becoming one, the soul of the twin princes says that they rejected their duty to become lords of
Wait, is this a three wave kind of boss fight? Are there 3 phases to this fucker? That sounds like pain.
Cinder, and settled down far, far away to watch the fire fade from a distance. The curse has made their souls nearly inseparable. So, why did Lothric grow to despise and reject his duty as a Lord of Cinder? Well, it's very likely due to a man named as the First of the Scholars. Soulstream says that he was alleged to be a private mentor of the royal prince, and that he doubted the linking of the fire. So it's very likely that this scholar was the one who made Lothric reject his fate as a Lord of Cinder. And there is so much more to the tale of Lothric, but we don't have time. I want to talk about the kingdom, about the royal family, but this video is only about the main bosses, so I still have to mention Osiris, King of Lothric, and his wife, the Queen, so please subscribe and look out for the optional bosses lore video. And the final main boss, the being we fight after the Firekeeper chastises the lords for going without thrones, is the soul of Cinder itself, located within the kiln of the First Flame. The soul of Cinder is actually a fairly easy being to explain. Ever since Lord Gwyn, the first Lord of Cinder,
Oh, dude, that is so fucking cool, man. Oh,
many exalted lords have linked the
fucking
First Flame,
the eclipse
and
in
it
the
is their
background,
very souls
gorgeous.
that have manifested themselves as
Ominous.
defender of the flame. The soul of Cinder is their deific manifestation. More specifically, it's clear that the soul of Cinder is this conglomerate of players themselves, us from previous games and cycles who have linked the fire. Using the ninja flip ring from Dark Souls 1, curved swords, pyromancies, sorceries, miracles, and in Phase 2, the music shifts to this twisted tribute of Gwyn's theme as he takes on the First Lord's fighting style. The kiln also, it represents the state of the world if you look behind you. It's a city twisted and distorted and folded in on itself, just like the entire game and bosses we just journeyed through. Dark Souls 3 contains the histories, the people, and the lands of the Abyss Watcher's age, of the Pontiff and Aldrich's age, of Yorm's age, and the story of Lothric that literally seems to have called forth old Lords of Cinder to link the fire once again. And as you stand in front of the flame, 4 choices lay before you, more than any previous game. But that's a video and a story for another time.
Oh, you
for this
fucker.
video is far, far too long already.
Oh,
and
Vati.
judging by my analytics for videos like this, only half of the people who started watching this video will still be watching now. So to you guys, thank you for sticking it through.
I'm
This
waiting those
video took
people.
a really long time to make. And the major shout out in this video has to go to a guy who runs a YouTube channel named AGR Cactus. He taught me how to use a lot of these camera tricks, and this video would not look half as good if it wasn't for his guidance. He has this video called The Beauty of Lothric, which really shows off how beautiful this game is when you look at it
that's
from
a dope
angles
shot.
that the game developers didn't exactly expect us to look at it from. So do me a favor and check it out and subscribe to him. It's crazy. I've probably been talking for about half an hour now, and I haven't covered nearly as much as I would have liked to have covered. So for that,
That vibe came through. That vibe came through as I was I was waiting until here, like the end, to really give my kind of thoughts on this. But yeah, it definitely felt like Vati had more to say, but didn't really want to
We have
Put
the
more
Lore Through
time into it.
series, which is dedicated to being really in-depth as we go through every single area in the game, and to bring out the characters and their stories and what their stories relate to, we have Prepare to Cry, and for everything else we have the Secrets videos. But next is a video just like this one, which gives you an overview of the optional bosses, and...
Okay. So that was Dark Souls 3 lore of the main bosses by Vaati. Yeah, this is pretty consistent. Like, I think this is before the Bloodborne video that we watched. So, I think anyway. Or is it after? I didn't pay attention to the upload dates. But, yeah, this... Again, my thoughts on this video are very similar to that of the Bloodborne video. I do think the Bloodborne video was a bit better than this one. This one, you can tell like Vaati has definitely improved a hell of a lot as a script writer, and storyteller. From here to his Elden Ring videos, like his Elden Ring videos, like no real complaints with any of them. He does a masterful job of explaining things in those. Here he is he's still honing his craft. Here I was a bit lost, but I'm going to mainly put the blame of being lost here on me and not on Vaati, because again, went into this as a lore of the main bosses without really any other information regarding Dark Souls 3. So yeah, but I do think some things he could have improved upon, could have explained a tad bit more, I think. But yeah, that was Dark Souls 3 lore of the main bosses. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.